Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and today let's have a look at what's probably the greatest news from the latest FS Expo and from flight sim development for the entire year so far. Aerosoft and ToLiss have announced that they are teaming up to develop the Airbus A340-600, which seems to be in a very advanced state already for Microsoft Flight Simulator. This is great news, as it seems that both teams have recognized their weak points from earlier development, namely the system and flight dynamics side from Aerosoft and the graphics and sound parts from ToLiss, and are now looking at the other team to fill in their weakness to develop a lovely A340 simulation. Now, we don't know too much about the exact simulation just yet. There's a lot of speculation going on, and even those news websites like Cruise Level or FS Elite are not giving us much about the new aircraft. However, there is a 3-minute and 24-second trailer on the Aerosoft YouTube channel, and in this video we are going to analyze what we can see in this trailer. Now, I do assume the aircraft will be study level. I do assume that it will share the good graphics of the Aerosoft A330 cockpit together with the wonderful systems of the ToLiss A340, and you can somewhat back that up from the trailer. However, it is worth mentioning that neither developer has actually confirmed that just yet. But without any further ado, let's get straight into the trailer. And you can watch it on the YouTube channel of Aerosoft Flight. I will link it in the video description below so that you can actually review it down there. But now let's get straight into it and let's have a look into what we can actually deduce from this trailer. So let's get started. Lots of cheesy music there. Let me turn that down a little bit. So, Situation 1, taxi camera. And I'm just going to stop right here for a second because it is worth mentioning that a couple of you in the community have said that developers like AnyBuilds or PMDG have said that a taxi camera is impossible, and now Aerosoft and ToLiss come along and say they have one. So excited to see what exactly that's going to be. But let's have a look. So, first thing you can see is the camera switching down here on the pedestal, and there is 3 of those switches. That's because you've got a switch for the captain's PFD, a switch for the first officer's PFD, and then you're also able to display the taxi camera on the system display. That's the one that most of you know as ECAM, the one on the bottom of the main panel. And this is where you can make that switching. Apart from that, what do we see in here? Well, a model that's quite similar to the Aerosoft A330. We can see the old school weather radar in here, which however is what's most commonly used in the A340 series of aircraft. We do see the digital transponder, and apart from that we have a standard Airbus pedestal. Notably, you can notice that the ATSU data link page is open in here and not grayed out, suggesting that we will get both AOC ACARs as well as CPDLC. But let's continue and have a look at what else we can get from this trailer. So that's the next overview right here, and well, the first view of the taxi camera, but we're gonna get better ones later on. Apart from that, what can we see? Well, we do have the takeoff page open on the left, the aircraft status page on the right. Not too much information that we can deduce from this particular screen. Over here, we can see some very good modeling on the DDRMI. We can see that they have the new ISIS fitted, the one that has the kind of rounded top and bottom of the attitude indicator, indicating that we do have a rather new software revision of the A340 installed. Apart from that, again, not too much we can see down here. Small word, by the way, on the auto brake of the aircraft. Yes, it looks somewhat like the unit installed on the A380, but the A340 does not have brake to vacate in the common form. I'm not sure if it's available as an option. I don't think so, since the A340 wasn't too popular with airlines, but let's see what we can actually see about the taxi camera up next. So, here's the first good overview that we get. We can say it's good modeling inside. Quite similar to the Aerosoft A330, to be honest, because, well, it's a very similar model, of course. Now, let's get into the next shot, where we can get some more information about the taxi cam. And that's right here, and this is where things are really getting interesting. So, what can we see on this shot? And let's focus this on the taxi camera for a moment. So, the first thing that I actually see, as someone who's been beta testing for quite a while, is that the colors are very different. So look at what you see down here compared to what you see outside of the window, because this suggests something as to how they have implemented the taxi camera. Mostly, it suggests that what we see down here is a different source than what we get up here. So, most likely, they have used Aerosoft's Frankfurt Airport for those outside shots over here. And down here, something this bright and with a rather pixelated taxi line that we can see over here suggests to me that they are using some kind of satellite image, or perhaps they are reading out the BGL file or the file that contains the airport in a similar way of how the default Boeing 787 does on its nav display. So my assumption of what the taxi camera is that they've implemented down here is that they are not actually simulating a camera, but that they are showing some kind of underlying BGL file, or perhaps a satellite image, a low-resolution satellite image for the entire world or something the likes, that they are using for the taxi camera. Now, at this point, let's talk about the real-world taxi camera for a moment and why some aircraft have those while others don't. So, the taxi camera is used in order to improve situational awareness around the aircraft, mostly on super large and super long aircraft. Remember that the A340-600 is one of the longest airliners in the world. And the reason why you may need a taxi camera on an airplane like this is not to enjoy the beautiful views, but to be able to judge the position of the main landing gears and of the nose wheel. Why do you need that? Because the aircraft is so long that you need to use such an incredible oversteering technique. Remember, that means moving your nose wheel across the center line in order to steer the main wheels on the center line, respectively, on the taxiway. If you would just follow the typical yellow center line with your nose wheel, then chances are the main wheels may leave the taxiway inadvertently, just because of the huge size of the aircraft. For this reason, you've got a taxi camera to make it easier to keep the main wheels on the taxiway properly, and in order to ensure that the nose wheel also stays within the paved surfaces. On some maneuvers, you have to take the nose wheel really close to the edge of the taxiway or the runway, especially when doing a 180 on the runway. And in those situations, since the nose wheel is located somewhat behind you, it may be difficult to judge its exact position, and that's why you've got the taxi camera. Now, depending on the way Aerosoft have implemented it, and with what we can suggest from what we're seeing over here with a low-resolution satellite image being in place, or perhaps a readout of the BGL being used, as you could see, for example, on the synthetic vision feature of the G1000 of the simulator, then yes, that will probably cut the corner and do the job. However, don't imagine it as some sort of actual camera that would actually provide us with what exactly is going on in your simulator. For example, I wouldn't expect to see GSX vehicles on there, because, let's admit it, that is a common use of the taxi camera in real-world aircraft, even though it's not what the plane manufacturer has intended it to be used for, but pilots often use taxi cameras to see what's going on in order to know how far their handling has advanced. Alright, and now let's move on with the video. So, again, look down here and look at how blurry everything is down here on the taxi camera. I do suggest that you are going to have a look into the original video here, because obviously you do lose some quality by watching me watching that video. So do have a look at the original, just to see exactly what you can see over here. But everything's very blurry over here. We can't make out any of the features that we'd have in the add-on scenery. However, what you can nicely see down here is the center line that's located over here, and how you can use the taxi camera in order to ensure that the main wheels stay on the center line, while you can clearly see the nose wheel over here getting oversteered and being closer to the middle of the runway over here rather than the line over here. You can nicely see it looking out here as well, how far they're oversteering. Nice modeling of the strut in the middle, by the way, just to mention it. Again, look at how the runway is very, very bright over here, while in the outside shot it is a rather dark asphalt runway. So, situation 2, engine failure. Now, there is a lot in here. Mostly, we will be able to see how the aircraft's performance and flight models look like. So what do we expect? Initial pitch after rotation about 12 degrees, rate of climb between 1,000 and 2,000 feet a minute. The A340-600 is not as underpowered as the A340-300 is. In fact, the 600 has quite a lot of power. But let's go ahead and have a look. The actual engine failure, in my opinion, is less interesting in this than seeing the flight performance parameters. So we've got man flags, SRS. Note that there is no runway mode over here. That's because we are probably not receiving a localizer on this runway. Note how they rotated before VR, just saying. Alright, and now let's take a look at this shot. All 4 engines are operating on takeoff power, and we can just have a look outside, or rather at the primary flight display. We can see a rate of climb of 2,400 feet a minute. That's with a gross weight of 326 tons, so we're not quite at the maximum takeoff weight. The pitch is around about 12 degrees, and that results in a steady airspeed. In other words, it looks like the pitch and power figures of the aircraft, at least in this very moment after takeoff, seem to be accurate. And in my opinion, that's far more interesting to see from this shot than the actual engine failure, because, let's admit it, none of us knows exactly what an engine failure in an A340 looks like. But we can deduct some of the standard figures, and those are actually looking fairly good. Close-up shot of the panel here, by the way. Good level of detail, I like it. So, shutting down the number 2 engine. It's a little bit different from what you're used to from your A320 or A330, because obviously it is a different airplane, and obviously 4-engine aircraft have pretty different performance requirement than 2-engine aircraft, so expect it to behave a little bit different from what you're used to from your 2-engine airplanes. Apart from that, it looks like they're using proper handling of the engine failure over here. We could also see the engine out mode engaging on the FMS down here, and note how the cost index has changed to engine out long range cruise. So that suggests that there is quite a bit of logic going on behind here. So it seems like the ToLiss systems have actually been integrated to a great degree, and this suggests to me that we can confirm our suspicion that the systems are definitely coming from ToLiss, and I kind of hope the flight dynamics are as well, but let's continue. So, very close-up shots of the flight deck over here, and everything's looking absolutely crisp and absolutely good. Lengthy status page. Now let's go back a second over here and just look at this. So they are in vertical speed 0 in order to accelerate the airplane. This must be somewhere very close to the engine out acceleration altitude. And once again over here we can deduct a couple things. That's the pitch, around 11 degrees, with a steady airspeed. So again, that's correct pitch power behavior for an A340-600. Alright, then let's have a look at the last situation. That's the RNAV approach, and honestly, there isn't that much to say about an RNAV approach in an Airbus aircraft. You guys have all seen it. What we can see over here is that they're turning on the approach mode rather early, and the airplane doesn't actually capture it just yet. What we can see as well, though, is that the VDEF dot over here is magenta, which suggests that they have let's call it modern for A340 style of avionics implemented. So there's our LDEF and VDEF coming alive. Pretty high approach, I guess keto or something the likes. So trim tank transferred, that's something that is worth mentioning over here. Trim tank logic in Airbus, let's call it second generation long haul aircraft. The first one being A300, A310, second generation 330, 340, third generation 380, 350, which actually, well, the 380 has a trim tank, the 350 doesn't any longer, because Airbus came to the conclusion that it causes more cost in maintaining that system than it actually brings benefit in fuel savings. It's about 1 or 2% or so in fuel savings. Now, trim tank transferred shows us that the fuel, since the A340 does have a trim tank, fuel had been transferred to the aft in flight and then gets transferred back forward before landing. So flying pretty quick over here, and you can again see something very interesting on Airbus long-haul aircraft. That's the performance you get during descent, because those things are gliders. And no, I'm not an air transit pilot, but you can really see how, even with flaps 2 out over here, so you have a little bit of drag from the flaps. The slats don't really cause any notable drag, but you do have some drag from the flaps here. And the speed is more or less constant, while we only get a vertical speed of 1,200 feet a minute. That is something very Airbus-like. The A330, A340 families really glide, and it looks like they've depicted that rather well over here. Also note, the terrain display was visible over there, and that's all that we know about those aircraft. There is a little bit of information available on Cruise Level as website. I'm not going to show that for copyright reasons, obviously, and for respecting them. I'll link it in the description below, though, even though you will probably have to use a translator because it's in German only. And Cruise Level reports, in terms of the planned features, that they do want to do a deep system simulation with realistic failures, realistic hydraulic and electrical logic, as well as complex SOPs. We don't, however, know what exactly that means, and we don't know if any of the other systems is also going to be as deep. However, with ToLiss involved, we have very good reason to believe they will. Next, Cruise Level reports a fully custom FMGS, including complete VNAV, go-around logic, as well as secondary flight plan and alternate routings. And, well, that's only what we expect from ToLiss. But the next is probably the most interesting. That's a custom flight model which circumvents MSFS limitations and offers precise long-haul behavior, including exact fuel usages. Now, the interesting part here is circumventing MSFS limitations. So we don't know what they're doing exactly, but it suggests to me that we have some sort of an external flight model. Now the big question is, will that need an additional program running in the background? Respectively, if it does, will it be able to run on Xbox? And if they are using an external app to calculate the flight dynamics, the answer would be no, it could not run on Marketplace or Xbox, but only on PC bought externally. Last but not least, Cruise Level reports that they do have a situation save and load feature, including autosave, loading of a flight in flight, and the ability to jump ahead and skip waypoints, which might be very interesting since the A340 is a super long-haul aircraft. And while I personally do prefer flying the entire flight with like 8x time acceleration or so, a jump ahead feature may be very useful for those who want to simulate taking off and landing at the maximum weight while not spending a set amount of time watching the airplane cruise. Well, and that is actually all we know about the ToLiss / Aerosoft A340. So very, very exciting announcement over there. And what's even more interesting is that Aerosoft and ToLiss aren't the only ones who have announced an A340. In fact, AnyBuilds have done that as well by dropping a single preview image of Lufthansa A340-300, suggesting that AnyBuilds is working on the 300, which would be rather similar to the A330 and therefore kind of a logical consequence. And Aerosoft and ToLiss are working on the 600. Two very different aircraft. It's going to be very exciting to see what each of the developers is going to offer us. But for the time being, I'm excited to hear what you guys think. Do put it in the comments underneath the video, and I'm really looking forward to hear what you guys think. If you've been able to deduct anything else from this trailer and from the information that's currently publicly available. And with all of that out of the way, thank you very much for watching. As always, leave your like and comment. I'm very interested, especially in the comments. And if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a subscription and perhaps a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.